What would you do if on a stormy night in your quiet hometown, your child simply vanished, leaving only a muddy tricycle and a loyal dog gone missing into the darkness? In Buckthorn, Oregon, where neighbors trust each other and nothing truly awful is supposed to happen, the Carter family's world shattered in seconds. One moment, Olivia's laughter filled the backyard. The next, she was gone. And so was Max, her German Shepherd protector. Tonight, we'll follow a father's desperate search, a town on edge, and a dog whose loyalty may be the only hope left. Stay with us, because this is a story about secrets, courage, and the powerful bond that just might bring a little girl home. On the kind of stormy night that makes even grown men shiver, Olivia Carter disappeared from her own backyard. The wind howled down Maple Lane, rattling window panes and sending leaves dancing like lost spirits through the puddled streets of Buckthorn, Oregon. It was the kind of town where nothing truly awful was supposed to happen. A place of block parties, pancake breakfasts, and neighbors who still left their doors unlocked. But tonight, every light on the street was burning, and a low, uneasy buzz spread from house to house. Inside the Carter home, shadows pooled in the corners. David Carter, Olivia's father, stood frozen in the doorway that led from the kitchen to the backyard, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing and what he wasn't. The back gate swung open, banging against the fence in the rain. The tricycle lay on its side in the muddy grass. But Olivia, his 3-year-old daughter with strawberry blonde hair and a laugh that could soften even the hardest day, was nowhere to be seen. David had always told himself that he was doing his best since Rachel died. He cooked meals, or at least tried, walked Olivia to preschool every morning, and tucked her in every night with the old lullaby Rachel used to hum. But some days, the hardest days, he lost himself in the ache of missing his wife, and tonight had been one of them. He'd stood at the sink, staring into nothing, letting memories swallow him whole, while Olivia played outside with Max, their German Shepherd. Max was more than a pet. He'd been Rachel's loyal companion long before Olivia was born, and after Rachel's accident, the big dog had become Olivia's guardian. She would loop her tiny arms around his neck and whisper secrets into his fur, confident that he understood every word. David always felt safer knowing Max was there. So when he realized that Max too had vanished, a new layer of fear squeezed his heart. David burst into the storm, shouting his daughter's name over and over, his voice swallowed by the rain. "Olivia! Olivia!" The only answer was the relentless drumming of water on the roof and the frantic darting beam of his flashlight cutting through the dark. He scanned the fence line, the alley behind their house, even the neighbors' yards, until his shoes were soaked and his breath came in ragged, desperate bursts. The police arrived within minutes, a rare show of speed for Buckthorn's tiny force, no doubt fueled by the panic in David's voice when he'd called 911. Deputy Sykes, a solid, capable woman with tired eyes, took charge immediately. She radioed for backup, organized a search party, and tried to keep David from spiraling into full-blown hysteria. The backyard filled with people, neighbors, officers, volunteers, moving in a careful grid, calling Olivia's name as their flashlights danced through the wet grass. Rain battered the searchers, masking every sound, making even the most familiar places feel alien and hostile. Someone found a muddy set of footprints by the Carters' back gate, small enough to be Olivia's, and larger, paw-shaped prints beside them. Deputy Sykes snapped photos, her brow creased in worry. Rumors had been swirling around Buckthorn lately. Stories of strange cars passing through town, reports of petty theft, even whispers of children from nearby counties who'd gone missing. Nothing had ever come of those tales, but tonight, They pressed in on everyone's minds. Every parent on the street watched their own doors and windows, feeling the cold fingers of dread. What if Olivia wasn't just lost? What if something worse had happened? David felt the weight of 100 eyes on him. He could see the questions in their faces. Why wasn't he watching his daughter more closely? How could he let this happen? The guilt pressed on his chest, threatening to break him. But he refused to leave the backyard, refused to stop searching, refused to let go of hope, even as the hours dragged on and the rain refused to let up. At some point after midnight, a neighbor brought over blankets and hot coffee for the searchers. The mayor, a kindly old man with a soft spot for Olivia, promised that no one would rest until she was found. Still, the mood was dark and heavy. Every time someone called out, "We found something!" a hush fell. Then the moment passed with a sigh of disappointment. Inside the Carter house, Olivia's bedroom light glowed softly. Her favorite stuffed bunny sat propped against her pillow, waiting for a child who didn't return. Rachel's photograph stood on the nightstand, watching over the room like a silent guardian. David lingered there for a moment, fighting the urge to break down. He whispered, "Rachel, if you're out there, help me, please." Meanwhile, somewhere in the darkness beyond the edge of town, Max pressed through brambles and mud, a child's pink backpack clenched in his jaws. Blood trickled from a gash on his side, but he pushed on, driven by a force deeper than instinct, a desperate need to bring Olivia home. Every whimper and bark was swallowed by the storm, but still he limped forward, trusting in the last command Olivia had whispered before she vanished. "Find Daddy. Don't let go." As dawn crept toward Buckthorn, the searchers regrouped. Hope felt thin as a shadow, yet no one was ready to quit. In that grim, gray light, the questions grew sharper, the stakes clearer. Where was Olivia? Why had Max disappeared too? And would either of them make it back home before the secrets swirling in Buckthorn claimed another victim? Stay with us, because what really happened that night will change everything you think you know about loyalty, loss, and the power of a promise. Dawn broke heavy and uncertain over Buckthorn, the rain finally slowing to a sullen drizzle. The street in front of the Carter house was a mess of mud and tire tracks, searchers' footprints pressed deep into the earth. Inside, David Carter sat hunched over a cold cup of coffee, his fingers trembling so badly he could barely hold the mug. He'd spent the night with hope flickering like a dying candle, replaying every moment, every decision, cursing himself for letting Olivia out of his sight. His phone buzzed and buzzed. Neighbors, reporters, even distant relatives he hadn't spoken to since Rachel's funeral. He ignored them all, focused only on the sound of footsteps, the hope that any second the front door would fly open and Olivia would run to him, muddy and safe. But instead, what came was the hard knock of law enforcement. Deputy Sykes and 2 uniformed officers stood in the doorway, the tension in their faces unmistakable. Behind them, curious neighbors whispered, their concern tinged with judgment. In a town this small, everyone knew everything, or thought they did. Already rumors were flying. Some blamed David outright. Others speculated that Rachel's passing had broken him beyond repair, that he'd lost track of his daughter because he was too deep in his own sorrow. A few wondered aloud about Olivia's safety at home at all. David could feel the weight of their suspicion, but he had no energy to defend himself. He just wanted his little girl back. Sykes sat with him at the kitchen table, her voice gentle but relentless. She asked about the day before, what Olivia had worn, what she'd said, whether anyone strange had been seen nearby. David answered everything, but the doubt in her eyes cut deeper than any accusation. The search had widened. Woods, creeks, outbuildings. Nothing. No sign of Olivia. No sign of Max either. Then, as morning pressed on, a commotion broke out at the edge of the Carter property. A neighbor's teenage son, sent to look behind an old tool shed by the woods, began shouting. David and Sykes rushed out, hearts pounding. There, just beyond the clearing, lay Max. The German shepherd was battered, his fur matted with blood, his body trembling with exhaustion. Clenched in his jaws was Olivia's pink backpack. Max's eyes, cloudy with pain, never left David as he struggled to drag himself forward, refusing to release his grip on the backpack, even as he collapsed at David's feet. Sykes called for a vet immediately, but the sight of the backpack sent the searchers into a new frenzy. David fell to his knees, sobbing, his hands buried in Max's thick fur. "Where's Olivia? Max, where is she?" Max let out a weak, guttural whine, trying to nudge the bag toward David, as if begging him to understand. The whole scene was heartbreak and hope tangled together. Was this a clue or a goodbye? The police carefully opened the backpack, expecting perhaps a snack or a toy, maybe a scrap of clothing. Instead, they found something no one expected: a small flash drive and a folded, water-stained note in Rachel Carter's handwriting. The moment Sykes read the first lines, her face went pale. She handed the note to David, whose hands shook as he read his late wife's words. "If you're reading this, something has gone wrong. I can't explain everything, but please trust Max. There are things happening in this town that no one will believe. I left evidence on the flash drive. Don't trust anyone until you know the truth. Protect Olivia." David stared at the letter, his mind spinning. What did Rachel know? What secrets had she uncovered? Was this why Olivia was missing? The sense of dread deepened as Sykes called in the chief, her voice tight. The backpack and its contents were quickly bagged for evidence, and the story spread like wildfire through the search party. Whispers of corruption, cover-up, and danger hissed through the crowd. It was no longer just a missing child. The entire town felt like it was balancing on a knife's edge. Max was rushed to the animal clinic, the vet working feverishly to patch up his wounds. As they loaded him into the back of the police SUV, the dog looked back at David with a desperate urgency, as if to say, "Don't waste time." At the clinic, Max kept trying to rise every time someone mentioned Olivia's name, pushing through the pain with a single-minded determination that left the staff awestruck. "I've never seen anything like it," the vet said quietly. "He's not just loyal, he's on a mission." Meanwhile, the flash drive was handed to Buckthorn's IT specialist. David and Deputy Sykes crowded into the tiny police office, watching as file after file flickered onto the computer screen. There were emails, photos, and audio recordings, evidence that Rachel had been quietly investigating corruption in Buckthorn's highest offices. Names and dates flashed by: Sheriff Grant, Councilman Monroe. Strange transactions, unaccounted funds, and finally, a list of children's names. Some crossed out, some underlined. Olivia's was circled in red. David's blood ran cold. Everything snapped into focus. Olivia wasn't just missing. She was part of something much bigger, something darker than anyone in Buckthorn wanted to admit. Sykes slammed her fist on the table, cursing under her breath. If this is true, if even half of it's true. She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Back at the Carter house, the town gathered in uneasy clumps, waiting for answers, for hope, for a miracle. But as the day wore on and the police presence intensified, a new feeling settled in. This was no longer just about one missing girl. It was about secrets long buried, the kind that threatened everyone. David pressed Rachel's note to his heart, his resolve hardening. Whatever it took, He would not let his daughter down. Max had delivered the first message. Now it was time to find the truth, no matter the cost. The world seemed to shrink into a blur of hospital corridors, anxious faces, and the constant low hum of fear that refused to let David rest. Max lay sedated at the local animal clinic, his side stitched and bandaged, an IV taped to his foreleg. The vet said it was a miracle he'd made it home at all. Yet every time Olivia's name was whispered near his cage, the German shepherd stirred, whining, and tried to rise, fighting the sedatives with every ounce of loyalty left in his battered frame. David stood outside Max's cage, pressing his hand against the cold metal bars. He didn't know what to say anymore. Guilt gnawed at him, bitter and relentless. He kept picturing Olivia's empty bed, the bright pink backpack now sealed in an evidence bag, and Rachel's note, her handwriting looping across the page, fragile yet commanding. If you're reading this, something has gone wrong. Trust Max. He wanted to scream, to tear down the walls and demand the world give his daughter back. Instead, he sat on the floor beside Max, his head in his hands, replaying every moment from the day before. The scent of rain and mud, the flash of Olivia's smile as she darted around the yard, Max's low, protective bark. What had he missed? What detail had slipped by, costing him everything? As afternoon shadows stretched across Buckthorn, Deputy Sykes arrived at the clinic with news. "We've analyzed the flash drive," she said, her voice low. Rachel wasn't just suspicious. She was right in the middle of something big. Sykes passed him a stack of printed emails and transcripts, each one painting a picture darker than the last. Rachel had suspected Sheriff Grant and Councilman Monroe of laundering money through phony town projects. There were coded references to deliveries, unexplained cash withdrawals, and even a few desperate emails from Rachel to an unknown source. "They're watching me. If anything happens, look for the truth." David's heart pounded as he read. "Why would they target Olivia?" he whispered, afraid to let the possibility settle in his bones. Sykes shook her head. "Rachel was getting too close. Maybe someone thought hurting you, taking Olivia, would scare her off or bury the truth for good." Her words landed with a dull, sickening thud. He couldn't help but remember the flashbacks. Those moments when Olivia and Max would play together in the yard, inventing elaborate games. Hide and seek was their favorite, but Rachel had given it a secret meaning. "If you're ever scared, and I'm not there, play hide and seek with Max," she'd told Olivia, her eyes grave. "He'll always find you, and he'll always bring help." David understood now. Rachel had trained Max for emergencies, teaching Olivia to trust the dog no matter what. Meanwhile, word spread quickly through Buckthorn. Rachel's evidence rattled the community. Parents clung to their children a little tighter. David overheard hushed conversations at the coffee shop, rumors twisting into fear. Some blamed the newcomers for the trouble. Others accused the police of covering up for their own. The search for Olivia intensified, but a new current of distrust flowed beneath every interaction. David returned home that night, the house feeling emptier than ever. He wandered through the rooms, his hand trailing across Rachel's favorite books, the photos of their short, happy life together. He opened her old journal, searching for any more clues. Inside, he found more than he expected. Pressed flowers from the yard, a photo of Olivia riding Max, and a single line underlined in red. "Never ignore the small things. That's where the truth hides." At the police station, Sykes and a new ally, Sarah Evans, the local journalist and David's old friend, dug deeper into the files. Sarah was relentless, her own history of loss sharpening her focus. "Rachel trusted you," Sarah told David over the phone, her voice unwavering. She wanted someone to keep digging, even if it was dangerous. Together they started decoding Rachel's cryptic notes, piecing together a map of Buckthorn's secrets. Late into the night, David was startled by a knock on his door. It was Sarah, rain-soaked and breathless, waving a printout in her hand. "I found something," she gasped. Rachel mentioned an abandoned sawmill in her emails, a place Grant and Monroe used for their secret meetings. "And look at this." She circled it twice on her hand-drawn map. David's blood ran cold. "Do you think that's where Olivia is?" Sarah hesitated. "I don't know, but it's our first real lead." They agreed to meet Sykes and organize a quiet search, not trusting anyone else on the force. As David lay in bed, sleep was a distant hope. He drifted into memories. Rachel's laugh, Olivia's bedtime stories, Max trotting beside them on lazy afternoons. He remembered Olivia whispering, "I'm never afraid with Max. He always finds me." David clung to that hope as the clock ticked toward dawn. At the vet, Max stirred. In his dreams, he could smell Olivia, her familiar scent calling out to him from somewhere cold and dark. He whimpered, nudged at the cage door, determined to break free and finish his mission. Outside, Buckthorn held its breath. In living rooms and kitchens, neighbors whispered about the corruption uncovered by Rachel. Some swore they'd known all along. Others shook their heads in disbelief. The sense of community was fractured, every face a question mark, every rumor a possible truth. Yet, amidst the heartbreak and suspicion, a flicker of resolve grew in David's chest. He would find Olivia. He would finish what Rachel started, and Max, battered but unbroken, would lead the way, no matter what dangers waited in the dark. The search was no longer just about bringing a little girl home. It was about exposing everything Buckthorn had tried to hide. And as another storm rolled in, David understood the only way forward was through every secret, every risk, every fear, until he could hold his daughter again. David Carter sat at the worn wooden desk in his living room, a spiral notebook open in front of him, Rachel's old pen gripped in his hand. He had barely slept for days, running on adrenaline and a thin, sharp thread of hope. The corners of the room flickered with early morning light, and for a moment, David allowed himself to remember. He saw Rachel's smile across the breakfast table, heard Olivia's giggle as Max chased her in circles on the lawn, felt the warmth of a family that once seemed unbreakable. The ache was almost physical. With trembling hands, he began to write, pouring out his guilt, his regrets, and the memories he feared were slipping through his fingers. "I should have seen the signs," he scribbled. "Should have noticed the way Rachel never fully trusted Grant. Should have been braver, more present for Olivia. I'm so sorry, Rachel." The words blurred, but he kept writing, letting the pain and longing fill the page. He wrote of Olivia's boundless curiosity, the way she would tug at Max's ears and whisper secrets that even he was never allowed to hear. He wrote about the way Rachel never gave up, not even when the world pressed in, not even when the town grew suspicious and cold. When he finally put down the pen, David felt lighter, as if some small part of the darkness had been forced out into the open. He stared at Rachel's journal, the one Sarah had found among the boxes in the attic. Its pages were filled with coded notes, maps, names, and tiny sketches of places around Buckthorn, places that now felt dangerous instead of familiar. Sarah Evans, the local journalist who had been Rachel's closest friend, arrived just after sunrise. She looked tired but resolute, her camera bag slung over her shoulder and a laptop clutched to her chest. She hugged David quickly and went straight to work, spreading Rachel's documents across the dining table. "Your wife was onto something big," Sarah whispered, scanning another batch of emails and cross-referencing the maps. I think she wanted us to solve it together, if she couldn't. Together they pored over Rachel's cryptic clues, deciphering codes that only someone who truly knew her could break. David remembered Rachel teaching Olivia to recognize patterns, to trust her instincts, to play hide and seek, not just for fun, but for safety. There were pages in the journal marked with a little paw print, a sign that Max was part of the plan. If Olivia's out there, she's doing exactly what her mother taught her, Sarah said. And if anyone can find her, it's Max. At the animal clinic, Max was restless. The staff had done their best to keep him calm, but the moment he heard David's voice at the front desk, he started to bark and paw at the cage door. Against the vet's advice, David insisted on seeing him. When they opened the cage, Max pushed past the pain and limped straight to David, pressing his head into his leg, tail wagging weakly. "You want to keep looking, don't you, boy?" David whispered. Scratching behind the dog's ears, Max whined, glancing toward the exit. He was ready, despite the stitches, despite the pain. Sarah watched, her eyes glistening. He's not giving up. Maybe we shouldn't either. The three of them, David, Sarah, and Max, became an unlikely team. They plotted out the possible routes to the old sawmill, the place Rachel had marked in red. It was deep in the woods, long abandoned after the lumber business dried up. Rumor had it that Grant and Monroe used it for private meetings, but no one had ever dared investigate, until now. As they prepared to leave, David's mind spun with fear and determination. He glanced at the framed photo of Olivia and Rachel on the wall, and a new resolve hardened inside him. "I'm coming for you, baby, I promise." He loaded Max into the back of Sarah's Subaru and set out, the early morning mist curling around the tires as they drove toward the edge of town. Meanwhile, in a cold, musty room deep inside the sawmill, Olivia huddled beneath a workbench, clutching the torn sleeve of her favorite shirt. Her small body shivered, but her eyes were wide and alert. She remembered her mother's words, every lesson about hide and seek, every whisper about Max. "If you're ever lost, trust Max and never give up hope." Olivia repeated it to herself like a spell, squeezing the little rubber toy Max had left behind for her. Outside, footsteps echoed and voices barked orders. Olivia held her breath, knowing that if she stayed quiet, Max would come. Back in town, the searchers grew frustrated. The police chief, Grant himself, gave an interview to the local news, painting the Carters as a troubled family and suggesting that David might have had something to do with Olivia's disappearance. The accusation was thinly veiled, but it sowed more suspicion. Some neighbors sided with David, others whispered about Rachel's paranoia and the so-called evidence found in the backpack. Buckthorn was splitting apart at the seams, those who believed in the Carter family and those who believed in the system, no matter how flawed. Sarah drove as fast as the muddy roads allowed, adrenaline crackling in the air. Max sat up, nose pressed to the glass, ears twitching with every new scent. At one point, he let out a low growl and pawed at the door. "He smells something," David said, his own heart pounding. They stopped near a break in the fence line, where the woods grew thick and tangled. Max leapt from the car, pulling David forward, his limp barely slowing him down. They followed Max through the undergrowth, past fallen trees and rusted machinery, their breaths visible in the cold. David's mind raced with worst-case scenarios, but Sarah steadied him with a touch on the shoulder. "Rachel wanted us to do this together," she said softly. "We're not alone." The scene cut between David's fear, Max's relentless determination, and Olivia's fragile hope. In the darkness, A little girl's courage became a beacon, and a battered dog's loyalty became the guide. No one spoke, but in that moment, they all believed, if only for a heartbeat longer, that love could find a way through the shadows. The air in Buckthorn was tense and electric as David, Sarah, and Max pressed deeper into the woods, following a trail that only the battered German shepherd could sense. The forest had always seemed like a place of adventure to David when he was a boy, a kingdom of tree forts and whispered secrets. Now, every snapping twig and distant howl sent his nerves jangling. He glanced back at Sarah, her jaw clenched and eyes set with determination, then forward to Max, who limped yet never hesitated, nose low to the ground, tail twitching with anxious purpose. They'd waited long enough at the edge of the woods for the police, but after the note from Rachel and the discovery in the backpack, they didn't trust anyone except each other. Sarah had insisted on bringing her camera, just in case we need proof, she said, though David suspected it was also her way of holding on to hope. A way to believe that one day, this nightmare would end, and they would all look back and remember not just the terror, but the bravery it took to confront it. Max led them along a narrow animal path, skirting a flooded ravine and weaving through brambles that tore at their jeans. The rain had left everything slick and treacherous. David slipped once, catching himself on a mossy log. Sarah almost lost her camera to the mud, but rescued it with a grimace. The sound of sirens, faint but unmistakable, echoed behind them. Someone in town had noticed their absence and called for help. Whether that help was a blessing or a curse, David couldn't be sure. After nearly an hour of trudging, Max suddenly froze, ears pricked, his entire body tense. David crouched beside him and strained to listen. Voices drifted through the trees, low, rough, unmistakably adult. David caught the name Monroe and felt a chill crawl up his spine. Sarah and David exchanged glances, then crouched lower, letting Max take the lead. He moved stealthily, staying close to the ground, leading them toward the crumbling silhouette of the old sawmill. The sawmill itself was a shell from another era, gray boards sagging, broken windows black as empty eyes, the smell of oil and rot hanging heavy in the air. As they drew closer, David spotted muddy footprints by the door, boots, not sneakers, and fresh tire tracks leading to the back. Sarah snapped a few quick photos, then gestured for silence. The three crept along the side of the building, heartbeats thudding in their ears. Inside, Monroe paced nervously, talking into his phone. David and Sarah heard snatches of conversation. "Not supposed to be this way. She's just a kid. Grant said we wait." Another voice, deeper and more menacing, replied from the darkness. David's blood ran cold. This was real. Every suspicion Rachel had written down, every whispered warning. It was all true. The men inside were desperate and dangerous. Suddenly, Max barked, a short, sharp sound that cut through the tension. Monroe's head snapped toward the door, gun drawn. Sarah froze, eyes wide with terror. David reached for her hand, but Max was already moving, darting around the back, leading the men away from the main entrance. "He's buying us time," Sarah whispered. "We have to move now." Inside the sawmill, Olivia huddled in the darkness, listening to the grown-ups argue. She clung to Max's rubber toy and tried to remember everything her mother had taught her. If you're ever lost, trust Max and never give up hope. The words echoed in her mind, a mantra against the fear. She heard the commotion outside and held her breath, praying her father was coming. David and Sarah crept into the side office, scanning for any sign of Olivia. Old machinery loomed in the gloom, casting monstrous shadows. Suddenly, Sarah grabbed David's arm. pointing to a tiny pink sneaker half hidden under a pile of rags. David's heart leapt. "Olivia!" he whispered, hope and panic warring inside him. Max, despite the pain in his side, reappeared and sniffed the shoe, tail wagging wildly. He nudged at a metal grate in the floor, whining insistently. Without hesitation, David dropped to his knees and yanked at the grate, muscles straining until it popped loose. The shaft below was barely wide enough for a child to crawl through, but a faint voice drifted up. Olivia's. "Daddy?" she called, her voice trembling but alive. David nearly sobbed with relief. "It's me, sweetheart. I'm here, hold on." He reached into the darkness, fingers searching until they closed around a tiny, shaking hand. Meanwhile, outside the sawmill, Monroe realized he'd been tricked and doubled back, gun drawn. Max lunged at him, barking and snapping, forcing the man back as Sarah dialed 911, her voice shaking but determined as she gave their location. David pulled Olivia out of the shaft, clutching her to his chest, tears streaming down his face. "I've got you, baby. I've got you." A sudden downpour hammered the sawmill, threatening to wash away footprints, tire tracks, all the evidence that anyone had ever been there. Monroe fired a warning shot, the bullet ricocheting off the machinery, but Max stood his ground, teeth bared. David shielded Olivia as Sarah ducked behind a support beam, snapping more photos as proof. "Help is on the way!" she shouted over the noise, praying it was true. David faced a desperate choice. Stay and fight, risking Olivia's life, or try to slip out in the chaos and find backup. He looked at Max, who growled, eyes never leaving Monroe. "We follow Max," David whispered to Sarah. "He got us here. He'll get us out." With sirens wailing in the distance, David, Olivia, Sarah, and Max made a break for the door, hearts pounding as Monroe shouted threats behind them. They plunged into the rain-soaked woods, running for their lives, knowing that the chase was far from over. But at last, for the first time in days, hope ran with them. The storm intensified, thunder booming so loud it shook the window panes in the abandoned sawmill. Inside, the air was thick with fear and desperation. Olivia crouched in the hidden room beneath the floor, her knees drawn up, arms wrapped tightly around Max's rubber toy. Every few minutes, she pressed her ear to the wall, listening for the sound of footsteps, hoping to hear her father's voice, dreading the return of the men with angry voices. She remembered what her mother taught her. Hide and seek isn't just a game. If you ever get lost, or if someone scary comes, you find a safe place and wait for Max. If you hear the danger code, 3 quick barks, you stay hidden until you hear someone you trust. Olivia squeezed her eyes shut, repeating the instructions like a prayer, forcing herself not to cry. Up above, David and Sarah, with Max at their side, huddled in the darkness just outside the secret panel leading to Olivia's hiding place. Max's nose quivered as he sniffed along the floorboards, tail wagging furiously whenever Olivia's scent grew stronger. But as the minutes ticked by, the tension ratcheted higher. Monroe and Grant were on the move, realizing the police might be on the way, knowing their time was running out. Suddenly, the front door banged open, rain slamming in. Monroe entered first, flashlight in one hand, gun in the other, his face a twisted mask of panic. Behind him, Sheriff Grant barked orders, trying to keep control as the situation spiraled. "We can't leave any witnesses," he hissed, eyes wild. Sarah ducked behind a broken crate, fumbling with her phone to send one last message to the authorities. "Sawmill, Grant and Monroe here, Olivia alive." Max tensed, body low, hackles raised. David whispered, "Easy, boy. Wait for my signal." The tension was almost unbearable. Footsteps echoed on the rotting wood above Olivia's head. For a heartbeat, everything went silent except for the patter of rain and the thunder in David's chest. Then, Monroe's flashlight beam caught David's silhouette. "There!" he shouted, and chaos erupted. Grant lunged forward, gun drawn. Max leapt between Monroe and the hidden panel, barking so furiously the entire building seemed to vibrate. Monroe kicked at Max, connecting with the injured side, but the dog barely flinched. He blocked Monroe's path, teeth bared, refusing to let him near Olivia's hiding spot. "Get out of the way, mutt!" Monroe snarled, raising his gun. Max didn't move. David yelled, "Stay back!" and threw himself between the gun and his daughter's hiding place. Grant fired, the bullet slamming into the wall inches from David's head. Splinters flew. Sarah screamed for help, phone pressed to her ear as she crouched under a broken workbench. Olivia heard the chaos and knew it was time. She remembered the special knock Rachel taught her. Tap, tap, pause, tap. She banged it against the wall with trembling fists. Max barked 3 times, the danger code, then whined twice, the safe signal. David heard both, adrenaline surging. He yanked open the hidden panel and reached for Olivia, pulling her out just as Monroe lunged. Everything happened at once. Max hurled himself at Monroe, teeth sinking into the man's arm. Monroe howled in pain, the gun clattering to the floor. Sheriff Grant tackled David, trying to wrench Olivia from his arms, but David refused to let go. Sarah scrambled for Monroe's dropped gun, firing a warning shot that sent Grant reeling backward. "Police are coming!" she yelled, hoping the sound of sirens in the distance would make the men think twice. But Grant and Monroe, realizing their crimes had finally caught up with them, doubled down. Monroe kicked Max again, this time connecting with the dog's wounded side, and Max crumpled with a whimper but didn't release his bite. David, bleeding from a cut on his head, held Olivia close, shielding her as Grant tried to drag her away. "She's not yours!" Grant spat, face twisted with rage. David mustered every ounce of strength he had, shoving Grant off with a desperate surge. "You'll never hurt her!" he shouted, eyes wild, heart pounding. He shielded Olivia, backing toward the exit. Sarah, pale and shaking, kept the gun trained on Monroe and Grant. Voice strong despite her fear. "Stay back! The FBI's on their way! You're finished!" Outside, the wail of sirens grew louder, bouncing off the trees. Blue and red lights flickered through the rain-soaked windows. Grant and Monroe looked at each other, silent agreement passing between them. They'd risk everything to cover their tracks. Monroe lunged at Sarah, trying to wrestle the gun away, while Grant drew a hidden knife and lunged at David. Max, despite his injuries, staggered to his feet and leapt at Grant, knocking the knife away and forcing the sheriff to the ground. David rushed Olivia outside into the storm, Sarah following close behind, gun shaking in her hand. Behind them, Max and the 2 men tumbled across the floor, a blur of fur and fists. Then, with a final roar, Grant hurled Max aside and ran out the back. Monroe tried to follow, but the police stormed through the front, weapons drawn, pinning him to the ground. Sarah collapsed in the mud, clutching Olivia to her chest, sobbing with relief. David scooped Max into his arms, feeling the dog's heartbeat fluttering beneath his hands. Max whimpered softly, his eyes searching for Olivia. "He saved us," Olivia whispered, burying her face in Max's wet fur. The paramedics rushed to their aid, treating David's wounds and loading Max onto a stretcher. Police officers swarmed the building, finally arresting Monroe and putting out an all-points bulletin for Grant, who had vanished into the woods. David held Olivia tight, rain mixing with tears on his cheeks. He looked at Max, battered, bleeding, but alive. "You're my hero, buddy," he whispered. And as the ambulance lights flickered in the storm, David knew that the nightmare was almost over. But the fight for justice and for healing was only just beginning. The hours after the standoff at the sawmill blurred into a storm of flashing lights, shouted commands, and the urgent bustle of emergency responders. Olivia clung to David's side as they rode in the back of an ambulance, Sarah gripping his shoulder with one hand, her other arm wrapped protectively around Olivia. The paramedics checked David's bleeding scalp and Max's battered side, working fast, moving with the calm urgency that came from years of crisis calls. Olivia trembled, exhausted but alive, her tiny hand buried in Max's fur as if afraid to let go. In the trauma bay, doctors whisked Max away for surgery, the veterinarian's face grave. "He's lost a lot of blood," she murmured, glancing at David. "But he's a fighter. We'll do everything we can." David watched as they carried Max into the sterile white room, feeling the cold bite of helplessness. He knelt beside Olivia, brushing mud from her cheek, whispering, "You're safe, sweetheart. Max and I are here." But his voice cracked, and tears stung his eyes, relief mixing with lingering fear and guilt. Meanwhile, the police station overflowed with chaos. Agents from the FBI and state police filled the halls, interviewing Sarah, David, and the others involved. Rachel's evidence from the flash drive, emails, documents, lists of missing children, became the central focus of the investigation. Under the bright glare of the interview room, Sarah relayed every detail: the sawmill, Grant and Monroe's threats, the coded map in Rachel's journal. Her words, captured on tape, painted a damning portrait of a town leader's betrayal. The news spread fast. By morning, Buckthorn was a town transformed. Local news vans lined the main street. Satellite trucks crowded the square. The community that once whispered about the Carters now gathered in clusters outside the hospital and police station, their faces pale with shock and shame. Some neighbors brought candles and flowers, setting up a makeshift vigil for Olivia and Max in front of the hospital. Children made get-well cards for the dog who had become the unlikely hero of Buckthorn. David stood in the hospital waiting room, Olivia asleep in his arms, as Sarah scrolled through her phone. "It's everywhere," she whispered, holding out the screen. National headlines: small-town corruption exposed, girl saved by family dog. Interviews with townspeople ran on a loop, some expressing disbelief, others admitting they'd noticed things but had been too afraid or too loyal to speak up. Grant, the once unquestioned sheriff, was now a fugitive. Monroe was in custody, refusing to talk. Rachel's evidence was airtight. Authorities believed it would not only bring down the corrupt officials, but also open the door for other townsfolk to come forward. The scandal was deeper than anyone had guessed, linked to missing children in other counties, hush money paid out to silence whistleblowers, and secret land deals that lined the pockets of those in power. David could hardly believe the scope of it, nor how close he had come to losing everything. He sat in stunned silence, Olivia's head heavy on his chest, her breath steady and warm. He found himself praying, not out of habit, but from a place of desperate gratitude. "Thank you, Rachel," he whispered. "Thank you for leaving us a way out." Sarah, ever the journalist, kept working. She filed a story that afternoon, her byline appearing on news sites across the country. Her phone rang non-stop as reporters begged for interviews, but she refused them all, her loyalty to Rachel and the Carters outweighing her ambition. She spent long hours with the FBI, clarifying the evidence, mapping timelines, making sure no detail was missed. In the middle of the chaos, David's phone buzzed. It was the animal hospital. Max had survived surgery, the vet said, but his condition was critical. "You should come," she urged. David carried Olivia, still wrapped in the hospital blanket, through the rain and across the parking lot. In the dim recovery ward, Max lay on a padded bed, hooked up to monitors, breathing slow but steady. Olivia ran to his side, laying her small hand on his paw. "You came back," she whispered, voice trembling, and Max's tail thumped weakly, eyes fluttering open. David knelt, burying his face in Max's fur. "You saved her, old friend. You saved us all." The vet explained that Max would need time, days, maybe weeks, to heal, but his will to live was strong. "He wouldn't give up," she said. "He kept trying to get up, every time we said Olivia's name." That night, as the rain eased and the vigil outside grew, Buckthorn began to reckon with what had happened. The mayor called an emergency town meeting, urging everyone to support the Carters and to come forward with any information about Grant or Monroe. The once gossiping townspeople now left meals at the hospital, organized a fundraiser for Max's medical bills, and lined the halls with cards and flowers. But under the outpouring of support, David felt the cost. He sat with Olivia at Max's bedside, exhaustion pressing heavy on his bones, haunted by everything they'd lost, and everything they still had. Sarah joined him, offering quiet comfort. "Rachel would be proud of you," she said. "Of all of you." David shook his head. "I should have seen it sooner. I let her down." "No," Sarah replied softly. "You did what mattered most. You fought for Olivia, for the truth." Outside, the first rays of morning sunlight broke through the clouds, shining on Buckthorn's battered, healing heart. In the hospital, a father, a daughter, and a loyal dog held on to one another, knowing that even after the worst night, hope could still find its way home. The days following the rescue at the sawmill rippled with change across Buckthorn, leaving the town raw and uncertain, yet alive with a strange new energy. Where suspicion and judgment once ruled, a softer sense of unity began to take hold. Every morning, townsfolk gathered outside the animal hospital, waiting for news about Max. Children pressed handmade cards and colorful drawings against the glass doors, depicting a heroic German shepherd with a cape, a little girl clutching his fur, and a family brought back together. The hospital's staff hung them along the hallways so that everyone, especially David and Olivia, could see that Buckthorn had not forgotten them. David watched all of it unfold from Max's recovery room, sometimes overwhelmed, sometimes moved to tears. Olivia rarely left Max's side, curling up on the floor with a blanket and reading softly from her picture books, her fingers brushing his ears with every turn of the page. She decorated his IV stand with paper hearts and rainbows, whispering to him about the days they'd spend together when he was well enough to run again. For the first time since Rachel's death, David felt the weight of isolation begin to lift, replaced by a gentle tide of support from faces familiar and strange. The town's response went beyond cards and casseroles. A group of neighbors, many who had once doubted or even suspected David, organized a candlelight vigil in the park. Hundreds gathered, some holding their own pets, others clutching candles against the dusk. Sarah stood at the front, her voice steady as she spoke about courage, truth, and the simple, fierce love that could bring down the darkest secrets. The mayor promised reforms, a full audit of the police department, an independent review of missing persons cases, and new transparency rules for all city officials. The words echoed through the crowd, lighting a fire of both hope and accountability. Inside the hospital, the Carter family was slowly mending. Max's wounds healed, each day bringing a little more strength back to his eyes and tail. Doctors were amazed at his recovery. The vet admitted privately to David that she'd never seen such a determined animal. "He didn't just survive," she said. "He fought for her." David nodded, tears threatening to spill, grateful beyond words for the loyalty of a dog who had become so much more than a pet. Olivia, too, found herself transformed by the ordeal. She became braver, sometimes surprising David with the questions she asked about her mother, about the bad men, about what would happen to other children in Buckthorn. David answered as best he could, never shying from the truth, always reminding her that they were safe now because they had each other, and because Max had refused to give up. Sometimes, late at night, Olivia would crawl into her father's lap and whisper, "I wasn't scared, Daddy. Not really, Max was there, and I remembered what Mommy said." Those moments became the new center of David's life, a source of light even on the hardest days. Sarah's news story exploded far beyond Buckthorn. Within a week, national reporters were requesting interviews, and the governor himself called to commend the family's courage. But Sarah refused to let the media frenzy take over the story. She made sure the focus stayed on the evidence Rachel had gathered, the quiet, meticulous work of a mother who would not let the truth die with her. The town's reforms began to take shape, with Grant's deputies placed on leave and Monroe facing federal charges for conspiracy, kidnapping, and obstruction of justice. Even as the media trucks eventually rolled out, the real healing happened in small, everyday acts. Neighbors stopped by with groceries or offers to help repair the Carter fence, which had been smashed in the chaos. Olivia received a puppy-shaped balloon from a local store, and someone left a basket of toys on their doorstep, addressed simply to Buckthorn's bravest girl. The sense of shared survival ran deep. The town's wounds did not disappear, but were slowly stitched by a growing trust and a willingness to confront the truth together. David visited the mayor one afternoon, carrying a copy of Rachel's journal. He placed it on the desk, open to the final entry. "She wanted this town to be better," David said quietly. "Not perfect, just honest." The mayor nodded, voice thick. "She succeeded. You all did." The mayor promised the journal would be placed in the town library, a permanent reminder of what courage and sacrifice could accomplish. Back at the hospital, the family prepared for Max to come home. Olivia danced around the recovery room, making up songs about the adventures they'd have together. When the vet finally wheeled Max out into the sunlight, the entire hospital staff cheered. David lifted Olivia so she could hug Max's broad neck, tears streaming down both their faces. "You're a hero, Max," Olivia shouted. "We love you." Max licked her face, his tail thumping with a joy that radiated through everyone present. That evening, the Carters walked through the heart of Buckthorn, hand in hand, with Max limping faithfully at their side. The community watched them pass, some with smiles, some with quiet tears, all changed by what had happened. Sarah joined them, snapping a final photo for the front page, a picture not just of a family, but of a town learning, growing, and finding hope again. And as the sun set behind the pines, David knew that the road ahead would not always be easy. Grief and loss lingered, and the scars of betrayal cut deep. But he also understood that healing was possible, one step, one day, one act of kindness at a time. Because of Rachel, because of Max, because Buckthorn, at last, had remembered what it meant to stand together. Days turned into weeks in Buckthorn, and the swirl of headlines and investigations began to quiet, replaced by quieter, more personal reckonings. The hospital room where Max had recovered became a place of pilgrimage for many in town, a symbol of resilience and hope. Yet beneath the outward shows of unity and support, David found himself wrestling with emotions that felt tangled and raw, sometimes as overwhelming as the storm that had upended their lives. He spent long evenings sitting at the kitchen table, a mug of coffee cooling between his hands, staring at the framed photographs of Rachel and Olivia and, now Max, their faces etched with laughter and love. He couldn't help but replay the moments that had led to the darkest night of his life. The split-second lapses, the grief-blurred days when he'd retreated into himself and missed the subtle signs, the nights when fear had kept him awake even before Olivia disappeared. The shame and guilt clung to him like a second skin, and he wondered if he would ever fully forgive himself. One night, as rain tapped at the windows, David opened Rachel's journal once more. He traced the careful lines of her handwriting, reading the passages where she wrote about courage and fear, about doing the right thing even when no one believed you. Rachel had always been the brave one, the one who asked questions, who demanded honesty from the world and from herself. David realized now that her courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was the willingness to act despite it. She had left him a roadmap not just to solve a mystery, but to find himself again in the aftermath. Max had become a local legend. As he recovered at home, the town's children took turns visiting, showering him with treats and affection. Even the adults who once whispered about David's fitness as a father now stopped by to say thank you, to marvel at the dog's quiet heroism. The story of Max's loyalty traveled far beyond Buckthorn, capturing hearts everywhere. But for David, Max's greatest gift wasn't in the headlines or the crowds. It was the silent companionship during sleepless nights, the way he rested his head on David's knee as if to say, "We made it. We're still here." David realized that Max's loyalty wasn't just instinct. It was something almost spiritual, a deep and selfless love that sometimes seemed more pure than anything humans could offer. The German Shepherd had never doubted, never faltered, not even when battered and bleeding. His courage had been the thread that held them together when everything else fell apart. In those moments of reflection, David understood that animals often embody the very best of us: unconditional love, courage without calculation, loyalty that knows no limits. As Olivia began to sleep through the night again, she would sometimes whisper to Max before drifting off, her voice soft in the darkness. "Thank you for finding me," she'd say. "You're my best friend." David overheard her one evening and felt the sting of tears, not of sadness, but of gratitude and hope. He knew that the bond between Olivia and Max had been forged in fear and danger, but it was now something deeper, a source of comfort neither would ever lose. The changes in the town were just as profound. Buckthorn had been forced to look in the mirror, to reckon with secrets and silence, to face the cost of ignoring uncomfortable truths. Some people had moved away, unable to bear the weight of what had happened or their own complicity. Others found themselves stepping into roles they'd never imagined, organizing new safety patrols, running support groups for parents, volunteering at the local animal shelter in Max's honor. The community had learned, sometimes painfully, that trauma could either break you apart or bind you together in unexpected ways. David was asked to speak at a town hall meeting, something he never imagined himself doing. He stood in front of neighbors and strangers, his hands shaking, Olivia's small hand tucked in his. He spoke of loss and guilt, but also of redemption, of the second chances that come when people choose to act with courage and compassion. "We're all healing," he said, "and sometimes healing means asking for help. Sometimes it means forgiving yourself." There were tears in the audience, and a standing ovation that felt less like celebration and more like a shared sigh of relief. Sarah's role in the story was not forgotten either. Her reporting helped spark a wave of reforms, and she became a mentor to others who wanted to hold power accountable. Yet she too struggled with the aftermath. nights when she replayed every decision, every risk, every moment she thought it might all go wrong. She found comfort in the Carter family's gratitude, in Olivia's laughter, in Max's wagging tail. Rachel's legacy lingered in every corner of their lives. The journal she left behind became both a touchstone and a challenge, a reminder that sometimes the fight for what's right requires sacrifice, and that hope can survive even the darkest of storms. David found himself reading her words aloud to Olivia, letting her mother's voice live on, shaping the future she'd fought so hard to protect. As the weeks turned to months, the Carter family began to reclaim their routines. Walks in the park, dinners with friends, lazy Sundays curled up on the couch with Max. The scars, both visible and hidden, remained, but they were no longer just reminders of what they had lost. They were marks of survival, proof that love and loyalty could bring even the most shattered souls back to life. David sometimes wondered if they would ever truly be the same. The answer, he realized, was no. They would be something different, stronger, wiser, more willing to reach out and hold tight to those they loved. And as he watched Olivia race across the yard with Max, laughter ringing through the air, he knew that sometimes being found wasn't about returning to what was, but about discovering the beauty in what comes after. Spring arrived in Buckthorn with a gentle promise, carrying new blooms and soft breezes that felt like a blessing after months of darkness. The old wounds in the town were healing, though scars still lingered beneath the surface, reminders of the ordeal the community had endured and of the courage that had pulled them through. But now, there was laughter again on Maple Lane, the easy music of children at play, and neighbors calling greetings as they worked in flower beds or hung banners for the upcoming spring festival. For the Carters, life was being rewritten one small moment at a time. David woke every morning to Olivia's giggles in the kitchen and the rhythmic thump of Max's tail against the floor. The nightmare felt like another lifetime, although shadows sometimes flickered in the corners of David's mind. Quick flashes of Rachel's determined eyes, the panic in Olivia's voice, the fierce, unwavering presence of Max on the darkest nights. These memories hurt, but they no longer ruled him. Ruff had transformed into something gentler, a quiet strength, a reverence for the family and community that had survived. Preparations for the spring festival brought everyone together. The park was filled with the bright colors of paper lanterns and booths selling lemonade and local crafts. Sarah organized a table of photos and news clippings. Rachel's journal open at its center, now displayed with pride in the town library for anyone to read. People paused to trace the careful handwriting, to remember the woman whose questions had helped change everything, whose courage had ignited a movement toward honesty in Buckthorn. On the morning of the festival, David, Olivia, and Max walked together beneath banners fluttering in the wind. Olivia wore a yellow sundress and a broad-brimmed hat, skipping ahead with a ribbon in her hair, and Max, now fully recovered, trotting faithfully at her side. David watched them, heart swelling with a gratitude that felt almost holy. The pain of the past had not disappeared, but it had given way to new joys. He saw it in Olivia's newfound confidence, in Max's proud gait, in the way neighbors waved and stopped to chat as they passed. The festival's highlight was a ceremony in the town square. The mayor took the stage, her voice clear as she addressed the crowd. This year, we honor those who taught us that loyalty, truth, and love can overcome even the darkest secrets. The Carter family, Max the German Shepherd, and the memory of Rachel Carter have shown us what it means to be brave. She called David, Olivia, and Max to join her. As they stepped onto the stage, applause thundered across the park, sincere, grateful, healing. David spoke briefly, Olivia's hand clasped tightly in his. He thanked the town for their support, for learning from Rachel's example, for coming together when it mattered most. We found our way back to hope, he said, not because we were the strongest or the smartest, but because we didn't give up on each other. We followed the example of a mother's courage, a child's innocence, and a dog's loyalty. That's how you change a life, and maybe even a town. Sarah was next, sharing how Rachel's notes and evidence had inspired new policies, brought justice to lost families, and shown Buckthorn and beyond that the truth is always worth fighting for. She closed her speech by inviting everyone to light a candle in memory of those still lost, and to promise that Buckthorn would never again turn away from someone in need. As dusk settled, candles glowed all around the park, their flames dancing in the spring breeze. David and Olivia released a lantern together, watching it rise into the deepening sky, their wishes trailing after it. Wishes for peace, for courage, for never losing each other again. Max sat between them, head raised, his coat gleaming in the lantern light. Later that evening at home, David tucked Olivia into bed, sitting beside her as she ran her fingers through Max's fur. "Daddy, are we safe now?" she asked. David smiled softly. "Yes, sweetheart, we're safe, because we're together, and we always will be." He watched as Olivia drifted into sleep, Max's steady breathing lulling her deeper. The night outside calm for the first time in a long while. In the days that followed, life returned to a new kind of normal. Olivia started preschool again, this time carrying Max's old rubber toy in her backpack as a lucky charm. David found himself volunteering with Sarah to help other families facing hardship. He shared his story not as a tale of tragedy, but as proof that even when everything falls apart, love can build something stronger from the pieces. The town's transformation continued. The police department welcomed new leadership, and reforms inspired by Rachel's evidence spread across the county. The library hosted Rachel Carter Day each spring, celebrating the power of curiosity, resilience, and standing up for what's right. Max was given a medal from the local Humane Society, an annual award now known as the Max Carter Loyalty Medal, honoring animals who'd made a difference in their families' lives. Rachel's spirit lived on not only in her journal, but in the hearts she'd touched. David often found himself reading her words aloud to Olivia, letting her mother's wisdom fill their home. Sometimes he'd catch Olivia looking skyward, as if searching for Rachel in the drifting clouds, and he'd feel a warmth settle over him, gentle and reassuring. One afternoon, as the family walked through the park, Olivia looked up at David and said, "Do you think Mommy knows we're happy?" David smiled, squeezing her hand. "I think she always knew we would be, because she knew we'd never stop loving each other." Max barked softly, as if in agreement, and Olivia laughed, the sound ringing through the air like a promise. And so life in Buckthorn moved forward, never forgetting the lessons learned, never taking loyalty or love for granted. The story of the Carters and their brave German shepherd became a quiet legend, retold at campfires and bedtime, passed on from one family to the next as proof that even the most broken hearts can find their way home again. If you've ever doubted the power of hope, family, or a loyal dog, this story was for you. Remember, every act of loyalty and love, no matter how small, can change the world around us. And in the end, what matters most is never giving up, especially on each other.